We have put aside the breaking NFL news that we were talking about in the pre-show meeting to start the recording of the latest edition, the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie back with you here, weekend edition of the pod. And truthfully, not a whole lot going on in Metsland as we're recording this podcast. And I will tell you, that's not necessarily a bad thing when the alternative is bad news that you're discussing on a regular basis. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Good, Chris. At this point in spring training, we're exactly 3 weeks out from opening day, I Bleav. And no news is good news with that being the case. And like you said, no injuries, no bad news to report here. The good news that I can report is that every episode of this podcast is...
Wow. They called me the master of segues. That was excellent.
Is being recorded in a video format as well. So if you are interested in seeing us as we are discussing the New York Mets on a tri-weekly basis, triple semi-weekly basis.
Tri-weekly is 3, but we didn't do 3 this week. And so you're like, wait a minute, I can't actually say that. But it's normally 3 times a week.
A semi-weekly basis, I Bleav, is the correct term for my AP style book heads out there. But if you, to get to my point, if you want to see the video version of all of these podcast episodes, I am uploading all of them to YouTube, or we are uploading them all to YouTube under my name, Jack McKessie, McKessy is the name of the channel. And you can see every single episode that we've recorded thus far. And that includes this one. If you're listening right now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts, you can tune in on YouTube and see our beautiful smiling faces ready to inform you about anything latest and greatest out of the New York Mets camp.
I'll give this a try. If you're looking for the video version of the show, you go to YouTube. If you're looking for the world's most trusted betting platform, you look for Bet Online. It's your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. They've got the largest selection of odds on everything from the NBA and college basketball. You see where the calendar is. It's March. So college basketball to the NHL and UFC, Bet Online continues to be your number one source for sports betting. From every three-pointer to hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. Jack, we talked a little bit in the pre-show of what we wanted to discuss, and I kept something in the holster from you. I didn't want to bring this up because I didn't want to maybe lead you in a certain direction. I wanted a raw, natural reaction to this. Juan Soto, it made news once again by discussing that there were other teams that offered more money than the Mets in free agency. My question to you, do you care anymore of what other teams offered in free agency to Juan Soto? Like, do these stories like hit you as a fan, or is it just the number is the number? I'm moving on. Juan Soto's a member of the New York Mets. Let's play baseball.
I don't care, Chris, but I know for a fact that there are some fans of other teams, perhaps other teams that reside in New York even, that are upset hearing this news because of one reason or another. I personally, I know that Juan Soto's on my team. I've seen him take some at-bats for my team. I know he will be a member of my team for the next 15 years. I'm not worried about how much other teams paid. I know how much my team is paying. And look, I'm happy that even if another team paid more, I know that Juan Soto picked the New York Mets as the team that he wanted to spend the next 15 years of his career with. And that's good with me.
Yeah, for me, it's just, it goes back to, if he picked the New York Mets because they offered more money than everybody else, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
If he picked the New York Mets and took, quote unquote, less money than other teams because he liked what the New York Mets were offering him and that was the tiebreaker, I'm good with that too. Juan Soto is a member of my baseball team. We have talked on this podcast plenty of times of the money is not an issue for this ownership group, for this organization where it stands right now. And so they're not going to stop being able to make moves because perhaps they paid more than everybody else. And we know that's not the case based on what Juan Soto is saying, but let's just say we live in a world for a second where the Mets had to offer $100 million more than everybody else. Okay. That's not going to stop them from doing other things. And if people want to accuse the New York Mets of buying Juan Soto and just outspending everybody, again, okay, Juan Soto's on my baseball team. He's not on your baseball team. I don't particularly care. And so maybe in the moment, I'm intrigued to see what other teams had their value on Juan Soto was and see how the bidding war played itself out. You like that behind the scenes stuff? It's March 7th when recording this podcast. Like, I don't care what the Dodgers offered. I don't care that maybe the Blue Jays offered more or the Red Sox offered more or teams were willing to go higher than 765 if they thought they had a chance for Juan Soto. I don't care. For me, up until the contract gets signed, I think we care about these numbers because we're trying to piece together what the perfect offseason would look like, and we're trying to compare budgets from previous years and try to see what the Mets have available to them. Once the contract gets signed, Juan Soto's playing baseball. I mean, we make the joke of it here on the show pretty regularly, but Jack, I can't tell you how many times I've actually looked at the number for Juan Soto. Like, I don't actually care. They're going to play baseball in less than 3 weeks, and every time Juan Soto comes up, I'm not going to be thinking of, oh, they're paying him $765 million. I'm just going to get to watch Juan Soto play baseball for my team. So I'm surprised like this story dropped when it did. I know they talked to Soto, so that's why. But it's March. I don't care.
Yeah, I think this might also fall under the category of there not really being much to talk about in Mets land right now. And
true,
just to have a player like Soto on your team, he's going to get a lot of the media attention, right? Because he is one of the best 3 to 5 players in baseball, and having him be a part of the Mets, be a part of a media market that is the number one in the country, that pairing just means there's going to be more coverage of Soto. I'm sure people are going to be sick of hearing about the contract, but if you think back to 2021, the Francisco Lindor situation, there were a lot of not media coverage, but a lot of fans were talking about how much Lindor was getting paid and how his performance stacked up to that. Again, like you said, I don't care. Like, it's just Juan Soto's on the Mets. The reasons he had clearly were partly financial. Like, we're not going to gloss over that, but he also has continued to emphasize the fact that he felt the most welcome with the Mets and with what Steve and Alex Cohen have been doing to build a culture and a reputation of a franchise that takes care of not just the players, but also their families. And so it's good to hear that as a Mets fan. It makes you more encouraged that future free agents down the line won't think of the Mets as how we have thought of them for 2+ decades coming into the Steve Cohen era. So I don't know. It's just, it's news, I guess, that we can talk about, and we are talking about it, but it's not really consequential at all to lineups, what the roster is going to look like, what other free agents are thinking about, how much they're going to get paid. You know, Soto's 1 in a million, and the Mets have him, and it's great.
He picked the New York Mets. At the end of the day, the reasons behind it can be what they were. He picked the New York Mets. He could have very easily picked someplace else if that's where he wanted to be. And so he is a New York Met, and they paid him a lot of money in order to do so. They didn't let that be the reason why he went someplace else. And Juan Soto is going to be a New York Met for the foreseeable future. Speaking of contracts, I do want to get your thoughts on one thing in particular, because Vlad Guerrero Jr. just kind of spilled the beans of like, hey, the last offer that we gave to the Toronto Blue Jays was for less than Juan Soto's contract. It was less than $600 million. It was like $100 million less, more than that of what Juan Soto was asking for. We were inside of $600 million. It was for the same number of years. And I did some rough, back of the napkin math. That was a below $40 million AAV for a 25-year-old first baseman. And I think the immediate reaction from a lot of people were, oh, if he's not asking for Juan Soto money, maybe the Mets might be interested in this. They might have a stronger appetite for that. I read this a specific way. I'll share, and maybe you had the same interpretation.
Okay.
I think that Vlad and his people wanted this out there, that they came in with an offer well below Juan Soto's number, because they don't want people and teams to take themselves out of the running before we even get to next winter. They want it to look like it's affordable to those teams to get a 25-year-old slugger. And then when the bidding war ensues, Vlad can get a number that's maybe more than what that last offer was to Toronto. Because if you're a small market team, right? If you're the Kansas City Royals, if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates, if you're the Miami Marlins, if you're any of these teams that don't really spend, you can say, we're not giving somebody a $765 million contract and immediately take yourself off the table. But if Vlad's saying, well, I'm not going to cost that much, you can maybe try to convince some teams to stay in the mix a little bit longer. That's what I think they were trying to do. But if that's the case, if that offer is true, what are the Blue Jays doing?
I don't have any idea what the Blue Jays are doing, because they were in reportedly on Ohtani. They're in reportedly on Soto. And
you've been begging people to take your money, begging them to take your money for years and years and years. You have a player that you developed homegrown for your team, is worth that money at 25 years old and as a first baseman. And you're just going to be like, I'm good.
100%. Yeah. I feel like the Blue Jays are in a way making the mistake of not taking care of their business at home before worrying about the business abroad, so to speak. So, I mean, I guess literally because they are the only Canadian team, but
Great point by you.
they are worrying about bringing in free agents that could feasibly take a spot that Guerrero could give up, right? Because
Mhm.
you look at what Guerrero's profile is, and as a slugging first baseman, how that ages. You expect that one day he'll be a DH, okay? Like what Otani is, what Juan Soto is expected to become in the semi near future. It seemed like they were worried about trying to fill the gap that Guerrero left behind before even trying to negotiate a long-term extension with, like you said, their homegrown talent, their most talented player that they've had in a very long time. And to me, I guess to tie this back to the Mets, I just wonder if the Cohen Stearns regime is willing to commit that long term to a first baseman who, again, down the line would have to occupy the DH spot rather than first base, because I don't see him being a first baseman long term, and Soto is certainly not a right fielder long term. So I just don't know that. You mentioned it was of the longer range of contract length. So
Mhm.
I don't know if I see, even though he is 25, even though he is one of the most talented young hitters that exists in the game, slugging first baseman deteriorate quickly. And we saw what happened to the Pete Alonso market 5 years into Guerrero's potential future. And I wonder if the Mets are really going to be in on that, and if it's more going to be a bidding war between maybe other heavy hitters in terms of big spenders, or even some of the smaller market teams potentially getting in and being able to participate in a bid for Vlad Guerrero Jr.
Yeah, let's get to next winter and worry about that then. Let's play 162 plus baseball games and see where the chips fall and see where the Mets are at as a franchise before we discuss another mega contract to another mega star to go alongside with Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, right? Like,
Right.
we can have fun and we can talk about all this stuff. And, Steve Cohen can make the comments that he made about, like, hey, I let my payroll people worry about that stuff. I let my baseball people worry about that stuff and talk about how good of a player he was. Let's get there, right? Let's get to the winter when potentially they could be entertained by this, or the trade deadline if Toronto is open to moving him as a rental, right? We can reignite this conversation down the road. I wanted to quickly shout out former Met great Tyler Naquin back in Major League Baseball, but as a pitcher this time. Yes. So shout out to him in those pursuits.
Cleveland, right?
Cleveland, yes, back with Cleveland to be a pitcher. I want to close with this, if it's all right with you. Sure. The Mets will play their spring breakout game March 16th. They will take on the Nationals as part of the spring breakout series, and a bunch of prospects on this list. I think the guys that I'm super intrigued to see if they get into action in this spring breakout game. Jonathan is listed as one of the pitchers.
Yeah.
Kevin Pareda, one of the three catchers that they brought, so obviously keep an eye out there. Jet Williams and Jeremy Rodriguez as a part of the infielder squad for the spring breakout game. And yeah, Carson Bench out there in the outfield, the number 3 prospect for the New York Mets, according to Major League Baseball Pipeline. Very excited to see these guys in action. The Mets have their number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 6 prospects all on this list. And then 2 top 100 prospects in Jet Williams and Carson Bench. So super excited to see these guys in action during the spring breakout game. I think this is a really cool initiative that Major League Baseball has put together in the spring. It's a cool little showcase for the future of the game ahead of the Futures game that we get every year during the All-Star break. So one of Major League Baseball's better ideas, and I love when these rosters come out, and I love getting an opportunity to see some of these future prospects and some of the guys that we feel like are close to contributing at the big league level.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool to see some of these guys not only in action, because we've seen a few of them in action already, but on like a starring role, I guess you could say, because they're only playing in prospects in this spring breakout game. And so to be able to see kind of what Jet Williams looks like playing out there, I don't know if the Mets player development tweeted out this graphic and they list him as a shortstop. I almost wonder if they're going to try to play him in center field in that game just to kind of give him an extra few reps, because they only have 6 outfielders on this roster and a lot more than that infielders. Another guy I want to shout out of the infielder group here is Ryan Clifford. We mentioned him a few times earlier this offseason as a potential first baseman for the Mets as soon as this year. And he showcased some of his pop earlier this spring. He is a first baseman, and with what Pete Alonso's contract ended up looking like for 1, maybe 2 years, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of play that Ryan Clifford has as well, both as a defender in this game, but also obviously at the plate.
Yeah, it's, to me, this is a cool little low risk environment for these guys to showcase their skills. It's not going to impact where they get placed in the minor leagues. It's not going to impact their promotion progression, right? It's just a cool little sneak peek, right? The main attraction is the New York Mets for 162 games, right? You go to the movies, you're here to see the featured picture, whatever it may end up being, but then you get to see the trailers, the previews ahead of time for the movies coming in the future. The spring breakout game in particular feels like the trailer, feels like the previews for what the next movie that you're going to go see is. And so to be able to see some of these guys ahead of time is really cool. So look forward to that. That game is on, I believe it'll be on SNY. We don't have StatCast for that game. I do know that a lot of people upset on Twitter that we're not going to get StatCast data for a game involving Jonah Tong, and I can't necessarily blame them for being upset by that. But yeah, just a brief little weekend episode here for you of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Oh, okay.
We got to shout out one more guy, and that's
okay.
Our pitcher of the future, potentially our pitcher of this year, Max Kranick, because he's pitched really well today.
And it was you sent me a tweet, or you read a tweet to me in the pre-show that he did something yet again, because the Mets are playing as we're recording this podcast here on Friday night. That he did something cool yet again. I've decided, have I shared my Max Kranick take with the people, or was it just with you behind the scenes of where I think he can fit in this bullpen? I might have been just with you.
I share it again. Why not?
Okay. If I have not shared this, then this will be the world premiere of this take. If I've shared it already, you can tell me in the comments. We are trending down a path toward where Max Kranick might be the seventh inning guy for the Mets bullpen. It might go Max Kranick, AJ Minter, Edwin Diaz. Like that. We're kind of bordering on Max Kranick being like one of the better relievers in this entire bullpen. No offense to Reed Garrett. No offense to Ryan Stanek. Listen, there was not a podcast in the world that was more pro Ryan Stanek than this podcast right here, specifically in the postseason. He was the only member of the trust tree. Okay, the only one. Everybody else was gone. Ryan Stanek, we wanted out there every single opportunity that he could get. So we love those guys. What Max Kranick is doing here in the spring is special. Like the stuff looks really good. Stuff looks like it's going to play. And so I can see a world where we get to him being the seventh inning guy with AJ Minter in the eighth and then Edwin Diaz in the ninth. Now, I know Fangraphs doesn't have him anywhere near the bullpen. That still has not been updated. But I think we are trending very, very close to him being a major part of this bullpen next year.
For sure. And as of the time of recording right now, he just came out of the game. The Mets are playing the Nationals. He came in for relief of Paul Blackburn, who did not have a great outing today. 5 hits, 3 runs, all earned with 2 walks and no strikeouts and 2 home runs allowed in 2 1/3. But Max Kranick comes in, pitches 1 2/3 innings, gives up 1 hit, strikes out 2, and continues his scoreless outing streak, I believe, to a 5th game. So pretty good,
Things
Chris.
You love to see. Things
That's
you love to
good.
see. I know spring stats don't matter, but a 5-game spring scoreless streak, it gets the 2 thumbs up here from me on this pod, because Max Kranick was I wasn't going out on a limb because he was having a good spring at the time, but I decided to reward him and put him on my 26-man roster prediction. The thing has aged like a fine wine right now.
It sure has. I want to also say real quick, the thing that's really notable about Kranick is he has background as a starter, and I almost wonder if they don't necessarily see him as a 7th inning guy out of the gate, but I could definitely see him taking on a role that Daniel Nunez did last year and eating maybe the 6th and the 7th innings, because they're having him pitch multiple innings and having him, go back to the dugout and come back out for multiple outings. So I'm wondering, because Nunez is having elbow issues, because I believe David Stearns has already said they're not going to try to push him to those multi-inning outings maybe at all this year, I could really see Max Kranick stepping up and being that guy to maybe the later innings to eat those innings for guys like AJ Minter and Edwin Diaz in the back end of the bullpen.
I'd be really intrigued. I don't know if a team has a bandwidth to do this or even really has the appetite to do this, but Jose Butto last year was a 2-inning reliever, right? Yeah. The Mets would use him to get 6 outs. And then the byproduct of that was he wasn't available the next day. It took him a little bit to then be available for the team again. But could you envision a world where you had two multi-inning relievers and you alternated back and forth with which guy was available to kind of help bridge that gap a little bit? I don't know, because you do run the risk of then sometimes having both of those guys down at the same time. I don't know if you really can make a bullpen work when you have two guys that are basically available one day and can't pitch the day after if they go multi-inning. But like, I could see a world where one night you have Jose Butto go the 6th, 7th, and then because Butto's down, now Kranick is your 6th, 7th guy the next day. Like, it's unique. It would be different. And I put nothing past the Mets in terms of trying stuff like that during the season.
No, I think the interesting part of that is if you have two different guys that are able to eat a couple innings at a time, that keeps everyone else in your bullpen fresh. So you think of the guys like Ryan Stanek and Reed Garrett, who maybe normally would be pitching the 7th, and they stay fresher and are more ready to go for, let's say, those every 3rd or every 4th game where both Kranick and Butto are down for the count. That's really interesting. And I think the Mets have, knock on wood right now, a lot of good depth options to work with in the bullpen. So I don't know. I think that's a really interesting point. I'd love to see if they try to experiment like that, especially early in the season. I think it'd be really interesting. And I think if anyone can do it, we know Butto can. We saw he just do it a little bit last year, and we know that Max Kranick can based off of how he's been pitching this spring so far.
Right. And Stanek and Garrett, both of those guys, and this is what makes me really excited about the composition of this bullpen. I mean, Reed Garrett was closing games at times last year when Edwin Diaz was going through was going through his struggles, right? Ryan Stanek is a veteran reliever who has back-end tough outs, last 3-4 outs of a game experience. And so if you did the scenario I envisioned where you had these two multi-inning relievers kind of working opposite of one another each night, obviously you can't use AJ Minter and Edwin Diaz every night, but Reed Garrett has closing experience and setup experience. Ryan Stanek has closing experience and setup experience. Nunez could probably slide into a setup role. And so all of a sudden you start to feel like, yes, we have guys that have defined roles, but there's some comfortability of being able to interchange these guys depending on the night. And I'll tell you, at times last year, Carlos Mendoza didn't have those types of options. He was struggling, trying to piecemeal together. And so that part of it kind of excites me a little bit. But we'll see. Maybe that's maybe a little too big brain thinking here at the start of the year. Let's let the season get underway. But okay, that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. We're back 3 episodes next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll drop those in your podcast feed. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you know when those episodes get dropped. But that's going to do it for us here on another edition of the show. Everybody have a great weekend. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.